For decades, if you asked anyone what the most feared predator in the ocean was, there was only one answer: the great white shark. 3 tons of muscle, rows of serrated teeth, a bite force strong enough to snap a seal in half in a single motion. No natural predator. Top of the food chain. End of discussion. And then, in the early 2010s, something happened off the coast of South Africa that made great white sharks do something researchers had never documented before. They left. Not just from one beach, from an entire region. Great white sharks that had reliably shown up at the same feeding grounds for over a decade, grounds so predictable that an entire tourism industry had been built around them, vanished. Cage diving operators who used to guarantee shark sightings started coming back empty-handed. Weeks went by. Then months. Marine biologists eventually figured out why. It wasn't disease. It wasn't a change in food supply. Something else had shown up in the water. Something that, for the first time in the great white's evolutionary history, made it the hunted instead of the hunter. This is the story of why great white sharks are afraid of orcas and what that fear reveals about who's actually in charge of the ocean. Let's establish exactly how dominant the great white shark is supposed to be, because that's what makes this story so strange. Great white sharks can grow over 20 feet long and weigh more than 4,000 pounds. They have one of the strongest bite forces ever measured in a living animal, capable of generating well over a ton of force per bite. Their bodies are covered in tiny tooth-like scales, called dermal denticles, that reduce drag and let them accelerate explosively, sometimes launching their entire body out of the water to strike prey from below. Their sense of smell is so refined, they can detect a single drop of blood diluted across an area the size of an Olympic swimming pool. And they carry an electroreception system the same as the ampullae of Lorenzini used by other sharks, sensitive enough to detect the electrical pulse of a heartbeat. Put simply, evolution spent millions of years optimizing this animal to be nearly unbeatable. For most of the great white's existence, adult sharks had no natural predator at all. Juveniles are occasionally taken by larger sharks, but a fully grown adult great white was, for all practical purposes, the apex of its ecosystem, untouchable. So when researchers started documenting great white sharks fleeing an area, avoiding it for over a year at a time, after encounters with a specific type of animal, that wasn't a small finding. That was a complete rewrite of what marine biologists thought they understood about the ocean's power structure. The animal responsible wasn't a bigger shark. It wasn't a new species discovered in the deep. It was an animal most people don't even think of as a predator of sharks at all: the orca, the killer whale. And once you understand what an orca actually is, not the cartoon version, the real one, it starts to make a disturbing kind of sense. Here's a fact that surprises a lot of people. The orca isn't actually a whale. Despite the name, orcas are the largest member of the dolphin family, Delphinidae. And that matters, because dolphins aren't just fast. They're some of the most intelligent, socially complex predators on the planet. Orcas can grow up to 32 feet long and weigh over 12,000 pounds, multiple times heavier than a great white shark. But raw size isn't what makes them dangerous. It's what's happening inside their skulls. Orcas have one of the largest, most complex brains of any animal on Earth, with a brain-to-body ratio rivaled by very few species. Critically, their brains have a highly developed limbic system, the region associated with emotional processing and social bonding that's even more elaborate in some areas than the human brains. This isn't just an animal that hunts. It's an animal that plans, communicates, teaches, and remembers. Orcas live in tight-knit matriarchal family units called pods, often led by a grandmother who can live for 60, 70, even 90 years. Hunting techniques aren't instinctive in the way a shark's are. They're taught, passed down from mother to calf, generation after generation, refined over decades. Different orca populations around the world have developed entirely different specialized hunting cultures. Some pods specialize in hunting seals, some in hunting fish, some in hunting other whales, and, as researchers off South Africa discovered, some specialize specifically in hunting sharks. This is the key difference between a shark and an orca, and it's the entire reason this rivalry exists. A great white shark is a phenomenal solo predator, a perfectly evolved ambush machine. An orca is something else entirely, a cooperative, communicative, culturally taught pack hunter with decades of accumulated hunting knowledge passed down through its family line. One of those is built to fight, the other is built to strategize. And when a strategist decides to specialize in hunting the ocean's most feared fighter, the fight isn't close. Let's talk about what actually happened off the coast of South Africa, because the documented events are more dramatic than most people realize. In the waters around False Bay and later Gansby, historically two of the most reliable great white shark hotspots on Earth, researchers began noticing something strange starting around 2015 and 2016. Great white shark carcasses started washing ashore. Not carcasses that had been fully eaten, carcasses with one very specific, very precise injury, a clean wound between the pectoral fins, with the liver missing. Just the liver. To understand why that detail matters, you need to understand shark anatomy. A shark's liver isn't a small organ. It can make up as much as a quarter of the animal's total body weight, and it's absolutely packed with energy-dense oils, including a compound called squalene. It's essentially the richest, most calorie-dense organ in the shark's entire body. A single liver can represent an enormous, concentrated meal. An orca doesn't need to eat the whole shark, it just needs the liver, and it appears to know exactly where it is. Researchers eventually connected the carcasses to two specific male orcas, nicknamed Port and Starboard, for their distinctively bent dorsal fins collapsed to one side, a rare trait that made them individually identifiable. These two orcas were documented, both through carcass evidence and eventually direct observation, working together to target great white sharks specifically, using a hunting technique that took advantage of one of the shark's only real vulnerabilities. Unlike a bony fish, a shark's skeleton is made entirely of cartilage, and its body relies on constant, controlled swimming to keep oxygen-rich water flowing over its gills. If a shark stops moving forward, it can't breathe properly. Orcas appear to exploit this directly. Working in a coordinated pair, they ram or flip the shark, disorienting it and briefly immobilizing it, and a great white shark that isn't actively swimming forward starts to suffocate almost immediately. In that brief window, the orca can access the shark's underside, where the liver sits close to the surface, and extract it with startling surgical precision. This wasn't a lucky one-off kill. Marine biologists and shark cage diving operators in the region documented the pattern repeating carcass after carcass, all missing the same organ, all with similar wound patterns. Consistent enough that researchers concluded this wasn't opportunistic. It was a hunting method, a specialization. And the sharks noticed. Here's the part of this story that turned it from a strange predation event into one of the most dramatic documented behavior shifts in modern shark research. After orca activity was confirmed in False Bay, great white shark sightings in the area didn't just dip. They collapsed. In some seasons following confirmed orca predation events, cage diving operators' businesses that had built entire tourism industries around reliably spotting great white sharks reported weeks, and in some cases entire seasons, without a single confirmed sighting. This is genuinely unprecedented in the historical record for this species. Great white sharks are known for site fidelity. They return to the same feeding grounds year after year, often for over a decade, because those locations reliably provide food, in this case, seal colonies. For a population to abandon a well-established territory that suddenly, following a specific predator's arrival that's not typical shark behavior, that's an animal recognizing something as an existential threat and making the decision to simply not be there anymore. Researchers studying tagged sharks found something even more specific. When a single confirmed orca sighting was recorded in an area, tagged great white sharks would swim away sometimes dozens of miles away toward deeper or more distant waters and stay away for weeks at a time, even months, before cautiously returning. Not a brief startle response, a sustained, deliberate avoidance pattern. Even more telling, researchers ran a controlled experiment using an artificial orca dorsal fin, a simple visual decoy, near a known great white shark aggregation. Sharks in the area scattered almost immediately upon seeing it, swimming for deeper water. This wasn't sharks reacting to a specific violent event they'd witnessed. This was sharks reacting to the mere visual signature of a killer whale, as if the fear itself is instinctive, or possibly learned and communicated in ways researchers don't yet fully understand. Sharks have swum in these waters for over 400 million years. Great whites have existed, largely unchallenged at the top of their food chain, for millions of years. And within the span of a handful of documented orca encounters, that entire behavioral pattern territorial confidence, built over evolutionary time, was overridden by fear of a single predator. That's not a small ecological event. That's the ocean's power structure being rewritten in real time while scientists happen to be watching. Here's where the story gets bigger than just Port and Starboard. South Africa isn't the only documented case. As early as 1997, whale watchers near the Farallon Islands off California witnessed and filmed a wild orca attacking and killing a great white shark in open water, flipping the shark to induce a state researchers call tonic immobility, a temporary paralysis-like response some sharks enter when flipped upside down, before feeding on it. That footage remains one of the most cited pieces of direct evidence that orcas are capable of, and willing to, hunt apex shark species. Beyond great whites, orcas have been documented preying on other massive, formidable ocean animals that otherwise face essentially no threats. Other whale species, including individuals many times their own size, and other large shark species as well. Different orca populations around the world appear to specialize based on what's locally available and what hunting techniques get passed down through their pod, but the common thread is the same. Orcas don't just occasionally overpower large marine animals. In specific populations, hunting the ocean's most intimidating predators has become a specialized, repeated, taught behavior. This is, in a strange way, the most unsettling part of the whole story. It's not that orcas are simply bigger and stronger. Plenty of animals in the ocean are large. It's that they appear to specifically identify apex predators, study their vulnerabilities, and pass that knowledge down as culture. Not instinct baked in by evolution over millions of years, but knowledge taught within a single family line, potentially refined and adjusted based on results. Which means, from a great white shark's perspective, the ocean didn't just get a new competitor, it got an opponent capable of learning. Let's zoom out, because this isn't just a story about two really impressive animals. It's a story about what happens to an entire ecosystem when its apex predator changes. Great white sharks aren't just powerful, they're what ecologists call a keystone species. Their presence, and specifically their hunting behavior, shapes the behavior of everything below them in the food chain. Seals stay more alert and closer to shore when great whites are actively patrolling an area. Fish populations shift. The entire ecosystem calibrates itself around the assumption that the great white is in charge. So when great white sharks leave an area because of orca activity, that vacancy doesn't stay empty. Researchers in False Bay documented a rise in other species, including seven-gill sharks, a mid-sized predator that great whites would normally suppress or outcompete, moving into the territory great whites had vacated. Remove the apex predator, even temporarily, and the entire hierarchy beneath it reorganizes. This is the actual significance of the orcas versus great whites story, beyond the drama of it. It's a real-time demonstration of how fragile a food chain's assumptions really are. For millions of years, great white shark was basically synonymous with unchallenged ocean apex predator. It took the arrival of a smarter, more socially coordinated hunter to prove that assumption was never really true. It just hadn't been tested yet. And that raises an uncomfortable question worth sitting with. If an animal as perfectly evolved, as ancient, and as feared as the great white shark can be dethroned this quickly once it meets something smarter and better organized, what does that say about the idea of an apex predator in the first place? Maybe it was never really about strength. Maybe it's always been about strategy. So the next time someone tells you the great white shark is the ocean's ultimate predator, the undisputed king of the sea, you'll know the real story. Somewhere off the coast of South Africa, an entire population of the most feared fish on the planet learned to run. Not from something bigger, in the simple sense, from something smarter, something that plans, teaches, and remembers. Something that figured out exactly where the shark's one weakness was, and passed that knowledge down through its family for the next generation to use. The ocean's most dangerous predator, it turns out, was never the one with the most teeth. It was the one that could think. If you want to see what happens when the ocean's food chain gets rewritten from an entirely different direction, not by intelligence, but by something that simply shouldn't be able to compete at all, that's exactly where I'd send you next. Because the great white just learned, then it isn't untouchable. And it's not the only one.